Today we're going to look at Mendeleev, a Russian chemist from the 19th century. In 1869 he first presented his periodic table, which is shown on the screen here, to a big audience of scientists, and many of them actually laughed him off the stage and he was very disturbed by this. However, his periodic table is largely unchanged for the one that we see in today's chemistry books, and he was a true genius to put his periodic table together. What Mendeleev did was he decided to organise his periodic table of elements, and at the time there were only 50 elements known. He organised his periodic table by looking at their mass. So you can see at the start he had hydrogen, then lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine going across. But also, when he started to arrange them, he noticed patterns starting to occur. So he noticed that when he arranged them in this particular sequence, that the elements in each column had similar chemical properties. So, for instance, he noticed that in the first column, all of the elements reacted with water to produce oxides. So not only did his periodic table show the order of elements by mass, but also he showed that they had similar chemical properties in each particular column. Other things that came out from his periodic table was that sometimes he noticed that elements were actually in the wrong order, and he switched them round. This is a particular stroke of genius because there are some elements whose masses don't correspond to their atomic number. And this is because they may have slightly more neutrons, they may have different isotopes, and the result is that overall when you measure them they give a heavier mass than you'd expect. He overlooked this and have just put them in based on their properties. So his periodic table was arranged by mass, and that's important to realise that's mass, not mass number, but he arranged them by their mass, and he linked that into their properties. Another stroke of genius by Mendeleev was to realise that although he had 50 elements, that there may well be some elements not discovered, in other words, some missing elements. And as a result, he had the sense to leave some spaces on his periodic table. These spaces indicated here as the asterisks. However, because he knew that these elements had similar properties to the ones that were around them in the same column, and also he noticed that there were already patterns developing in terms of their physical properties, he was able to predict particular properties. Now, in specific, this element here, which we now know to be germanium, Mendeleev, he called it ecosilicon, and he predicted that it had particular properties. He predicted its density, its mass, and how it would react. And when germanium was finally discovered, they did in fact find that it had very similar properties to those predicted by Mendeleev. Now, there are still some differences between our modern periodic table, and our modern periodic table is actually organised by atomic number, not mass or mass number. And in addition, there is a whole group of elements that are not mentioned on Mendeleev's periodic table at all, and those are the noble gases, or group 8. And that's because these gases were discovered very late on, because of course, although they're gases and are in the air around us, they do not react. And so therefore you don't find them in any compounds, and they were unaware that they existed until into the 20th century. So there is a whole group 8 that does not appear on the end of Mendeleev's periodic table. So in summary, Mendeleev was not the first person, but the first person to put together a periodic table that is very similar to the one that we use today in chemistry. He organised it by mass and identified patterns within the properties of the elements that he put into his particular periodic table. Because of this, he was able to identify gaps in his periodic table and predict the properties of the elements that would later be discovered to fill these gaps. The modern periodic table differs from Mendeleev in that it is ordered by the atomic number and has the noble gases which were not present at all in Mendeleev's periodic table.